How far does a man fall before there's no road back? That was the first thought Elias Carr had as he rode down from the high canyon, his hip burning like a hot iron under his skin. The pain was old and stubborn, a wound from the war that had never healed right. Every jolt of the trail made it grind deeper into his bones, but he kept riding. He had to. Winter was coming early, and his small cabin in the hills was running low on flour, salt, and everything else a man needed to make it through the cold. Dry Creek waited in the valley below, a short strip of muddy road lined with raw timber buildings that leaned like tired drunkards. The place smelled of pine, wet dirt, smoke, and the sharp, rotten stink from the tannery upstream. It was not a kind place. It never had been. But Elias didn't come here for kindness. He came for supplies, and nothing more. He hitched his mare, Bess, outside the mercantile. She stood quiet, her breath leaving white clouds in the cold air. Elias gave her a slow pat, his stiff fingers brushing her neck. For a man of 34, he moved like someone much older. He had learned to take slow steps, to keep his shoulders low, to avoid drawing eyes. People mistook it for laziness. In truth, it was caution carved into his bones. Inside the mercantile, he bought flour, beans, a sack of salt, an axe handle, and 2 boxes of cartridges. He spoke only when needed. He paid in coin and walked back out before the proprietor could drag him into a conversation. He had one stop left: whiskey. Not for drinking, though he'd had nights where that was reason enough. No. This was for the cold and the long ride home. The one place in town that sold decent rye was the Golden Spur Saloon. He hated everything about saloons: the smoke, the sweat, the crooked laughter, but the bottle he needed was inside. So he pushed through the batwing doors and stepped into a storm of noise. The piano crashed out a tune so sour it hurt his teeth. Blue smoke clung thick to the ceiling. Men shouted over card tables. Someone spilled beer, someone cursed about it. Elias kept his head down and walked toward the bar. His world was only the floorboards and the thought of getting out of here fast. Then he heard it. A wet crack. The sound of flesh hit hard. A heavy thud against a wall. A girl's choked gasp swallowed by the noise. "You'll do what I say, girl," a man snarled. "Do it now, or I'll break that pretty face." Elias stopped walking. He didn't want to look. He had spent 10 years perfecting the art of not seeing things. His business was flour, salt, and whiskey. Nothing more. The world had taught him that getting involved led to fire, death, and ghosts that never left. But he looked anyway. Abel, owner of the Spur, had his fist twisted tight in a young girl's hair. She couldn't have been more than 16 or 17. Thin. Barefoot. Wearing a torn chemise that barely clung to her shoulders. A bruise was blooming dark and ugly on her cheek. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. Abel yanked her toward the back rooms where he kept the special customers. "Silas is waitin'. On you," Abel hissed. "Paid extra for fresh stock." The girl, Dileia, stumbled, her eyes hollow and wide. She didn't fight. That was the part that hit Elias the hardest. She just hung there, limp, like she had already learned there was no point in struggling. "Don't make it worse," she whispered. "Please." Elias felt it the way he felt winter, deep, cold, old. He thought of fire, screams. The woman and child he couldn't forget. He had turned away once. He had let something awful happen because he hadn't raised his voice, hadn't raised his hand. Not again. He was almost at the bar. He could have kept walking, picked up his bottle, left. He could have pretended he didn't hear her. But his feet stopped. His hand went to his pocket. Not for his pistol, for $2 silver. "Let her go." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It cut through the saloon like a knife dragged across stone. Abel turned, his face twisted in annoyance. "What's that, Carr? You want a turn? She ain't free. Silas paid for the whole night." Elias didn't look at Abel. He looked at the girl. Something dead looked back at him. He tossed the $2 silver onto the bar. They hit the wood with a sharp final thud. "She's mine now." The entire room froze, the piano stopped, the laughter died. Men turned, curious and hungry for a show. Abel stared at the coins. $2 was nothing, an insult, but easier than angering Silas, and cheaper than dealing with a dead girl nobody would pay for tomorrow. Abel grinned. "You bought damaged goods," he said. "She's yours." He shoved Dileia hard, and she fell to her knees at Elias's feet. The room roared with laughter. Whiskey sloshed. The piano started again. Elias didn't move. He just stared down at her trembling shape on the floor. "Get up," he said, his voice flat. She rose slowly. Her arms crossed over her chest, trying to cover the torn chemise. Her feet were black with grime, her hair a tangled mess. "Where?" she whispered, staring at the ground. "The back room? Or do you want me to kneel here?" "I'm leaving town," he said. She blinked, confused. "What do you expect? You paid $2. A man pays $2. He expects something." "I expect nothing," quote. She searched his face, desperate for the trick. Finding none, she whispered, "What road?" "A different one than this." He turned and walked out. He didn't look back. But when he reached his horse, hands shaking from something colder than winter, a small shadow fell beside him. Dileia stood there, wrapped in a ragged blanket, barefoot in the freezing mud. Terrified, but choosing to follow him. He stared at her a long time. "You'll freeze. I've been cold before." He offered his hand. She flinched, but took it. He pulled her onto the saddle, her small, trembling body rigid in front of his. Then he nudged Bess forward. They left Dry Creek behind. No words, no plan. Just two broken souls riding into a storm neither of them understood. What does a person do when the past comes riding after them? That question sat heavy on Elias Carr's shoulders as he and Dileia climbed into the high desert hills, leaving Dry Creek behind. The light faded fast, the sun sinking behind the ridges until the sky turned a bruised shade of purple. The cold worsened. The trail narrowed. The wind picked up. And the silence grew thick enough to feel between them. Dileia sat stiff in the saddle, her back straight, her small hands gripping the horn as if letting go would send her tumbling into an endless dark. She didn't lean on him, not even a little. Every bone in her body was tense, like she expected pain at any moment. Elias knew that kind of tension. He had lived with it for years. It was the kind of fear that never rested. After nearly an hour of riding, her voice cracked quietly through the cold air. "What am I to you?" Elias kept his eyes on the trail. "What do you mean?" "In the saloon," she said. Her voice shook, but not from the cold. "You said, 'She's mine now.' What does that mean?" He didn't answer right away. The words tasted wrong, coming back to him. They had been the only words he could think of to stop Abel. Words meant to protect, not claim. But she had no reason to believe that. She took a breath. "Am I your woman now? Or your whore?" Elias stopped the horse. The wind hissed through the pines. The canyon dropped off beside them. He looked down at the top of her head, too scared to look at her face. "No one owns you," he said. She laughed, a short, cracked laugh. "Everyone has owned me. Abel, Silas, the men before them, my stepfather before them. Men always own me. I just need to know the rules of the next one." "There are no rules," Elias said, his voice tired. She twisted to look at him, her eyes sharp with a cold fire. "Don't lie to me. Don't ever lie to me. It's worse than hitting." He stared at her, at the bruises on her cheek, at the fear behind her anger, at something else too, something that looked like the last bit of strength she had left. "You're free," he said. Those words echoed through the silent canyon. She stared at him, then her face crumpled in rage instead of relief. "Free?" she hissed. "Free?" A woman alone, with no money, no shoes, in a torn dress, in the middle of nowhere, with winter coming on? You call that free? That's not freedom. That's just a different kind of cage. He had no answer, so he nudged Bess forward, and they rode the rest of the trail in silence. As the sky darkened, she slumped against him, her head falling back onto his chest when exhaustion finally won. She didn't mean to. It was not trust. It was collapse. He carried her the rest of the way home. His cabin was a sturdy single-room shelter tucked into a narrow canyon, with a barn, a tiny corral, and a pump chilled stiff by the freezing air. It was plain. Bare bones. But it was honest. When they rode into the yard, dusk had already swallowed the world. Elias dismounted, every movement slow from pain. He reached up for Dileia. She slid off the saddle, her bare feet sinking into the cold dirt. She swayed, dizzy and half-frozen. Elias caught her before she fell. Inside the cabin was dark and cold. He set her on a stool, lit a lantern, and quickly built a fire in the stove. She didn't move, didn't speak. She looked like a ghost someone had dragged out of a grave. "You're tracking mud," Elias said quietly. She looked down at her filthy feet as if seeing them for the first time. She didn't answer. He pointed to a basin. "There's soap. Water's cold, but you can clean up." Quote. He rummaged through a wooden trunk and pulled out a wool shirt and an old pair of trousers. They were far too big for her, but they were warm. "Put these on." He turned away to give her privacy. She moved slowly, washing with the freezing water, gasping when it touched her skin. When she dressed, the shirt swallowed her thin frame, and the trousers had to be tied with a rope, but she was covered, and warmer than before. He ladled stew into 2 bowls. She held hers in both hands, absorbing the warmth without eating a single bite. Her eyes stayed on the fire, wide and empty. "Where do I sleep?" she asked quietly. Elias looked at his bed, his only real bed. He looked at her. He made the choice without letting himself think too long. In here. He opened the small storage room beside the fireplace. Inside was a narrow cot he used on long nights. She stared at it, confused. "And you?" "Out here." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes filled with a disbelief that hurt to witness. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she slipped into the small room and closed the door. Elias sat at the table for a long time after that, listening to the storm. Listening to the quiet breaths of a girl whose life had been nothing but fear. Later, when he lay on his bed, her soft, muffled crying seeped through the thin wall. Quiet cries, the kind made by someone who learned long ago that loud grief earned punishment. Elias stared at the darkness. He didn't go to her. He didn't comfort her. He just listened, his jaw clenched tight, hating himself for the way he didn't know how to help. The next morning, the world was white. A heavy snow had buried the canyon. They were trapped. Dileia came from her room slowly, moving as if expecting to be struck. Elias handed her a mug of hot coffee. "We're snowed in," he said. "How long?" "A week, maybe 2. She nodded. Then, with a small, uncertain voice, she asked, "What work do you have for me?" Her meaning was clear. She expected to earn her keep. Elias sighed. He didn't want help. He didn't want anyone near his life. But she was determined. "Find the boots by the door," he said. "They'll be too big. Wear 2 pairs of socks." Quote. And so the days began. They worked in silence. She fed the chickens, milked the cow, swept the cabin, mended his coat with neat, careful stitches. He chopped wood, fed the fire, fixed the harness, and avoided her eyes. They moved around each other like ghosts, sharing the same room. Until the afternoon, a voice shattered the quiet. "Carr, you in there, you old hermit?" Elias froze. Dileia disappeared behind the door to her room without a sound. Elias walked outside, gripping the axe. Jed Sloum, greasy-faced trapper, sat on a mule. "You got company, I hear," Jed said, squinting toward the shadows in the cabin. Elias blocked the entrance. The trapper chuckled. "Heard Abel's missing a girl. Says she ran off. Looks a mite like the one inside your cabin." A cold shock hit Elias. His grip on the axe tightened. Jed leaned closer. "Don't matter to me. I just like to know what a man keeps tucked away, especially a man like you." Elias said nothing. Jed smirked and rode off, muttering something about rumors and missing girls. When Elias returned inside, Dileia stood by the stove, pale as snow. "He saw me," she whispered. "He's gone. Elias said, too harsh, too sharp. She flinched, and then, in a voice toughened by pain, she said, "Are you ashamed of me?" That question cut deeper than any knife. She stepped toward him, anger trembling under her skin. "Do I spoil your quiet life? Am I something you hide?" "You don't know what you're talking about," he growled. But she did. She saw the storm inside him. She saw the way he avoided her. She saw the fear he carried. And she mistook it for shame. The argument ended with her retreating to her room, her door braced with something heavy, and Elias outside, chopping wood until his muscles shook and his hip screamed. That night, when the cabin was dark and the fire low, Dileia came quietly into the room, wrapped in a blanket, kneeling beside his bed, offering herself because she thought that was the only value she had left. "Do I disgust you?" she whispered. Elias couldn't breathe. He turned away from her, not in rejection of her, but in horror at what the world had made her believe. She gave a small choke sound, like heartbreak made into breath, and returned to her room. He heard the bar slide into place. He heard her cry again. Quiet, broken. And he lay there, hating the past, hating the world, hating himself. By morning, she was gone. He found her half frozen in the barn, rigid and unmoving. Her skin blue, her breath shallow. He carried her back to the cabin, his own hands shaking. He forced warmth back into her limbs, rubbed life into her hands, piled blankets over her small, shaking body. He saved her life, but she saved something in him, too. Later, when she was warm enough to speak, she whispered the truth that twisted both their fates. "I stabbed Silas," she said. "I think I killed him." Elias sat still, his jaw tense, his heart pounding. He looked at her with no fear, no anger, only understanding. And that was the moment she truly saw him. The quiet rancher wasn't quiet at all. He was a man built from shadows, guilt, and survival. And her confession didn't push him away. It pulled him closer, because he knew something about killing, and he knew something about living with it. Their story was about to turn into something neither of them was ready for. What happens when two broken people find danger closing in from every side? Elias Carr learned the answer the morning after Dileia's confession. Snow covered the canyon in a layer so deep it swallowed half the fence posts. The air bit hard, sharp as broken glass. Inside the cabin, Dileia sat wrapped in blankets, pale but awake. Her eyes followed Elias with a quiet fear, like she was waiting for him to change his mind about letting her stay. He poured her a cup of hot coffee and set it on the table. She stared at it before whispering, "You're not turning me in?" "No." "Even after what I did?" "You did what you had to," Elias said. Sometimes that's the only choice a person gets. For the first time, she looked straight at him. There was shock in her eyes, but something else too, something warm. Something she didn't know the name for. Before she could speak, a distant echo cut through the winter quiet. Horses. More than one. Elias crossed to the window. His jaw tightened. 3 riders were pushing through the snow, heading straight toward his cabin. Men with dark coats, rifles across their saddles. Men who moved like they knew exactly where they were going. Dileia's breath caught. "It's them." "Stay down," Elias said. She dropped to the floor, pulling the blanket around her. Her hands trembled so hard she had to press them to her sides. Elias could see it. This wasn't fear of strangers. This was fear of the past finding her again. Elias grabbed his rifle and stepped onto the porch. The riders stopped 10 paces from the cabin. The front one lowered his scarf. Abel's missing partner, Silas's older brother, called her Pike, a man with a cruel mouth and cold eyes. "You Carr?" he called out. "I am." "We heard you came into town yesterday. Heard you walked out with something that didn't belong to you." Elias didn't blink. "I walked out with what I paid for." Pike smirked. "I ain't here about money. I'm here about blood. My brother got himself stabbed last night. Folks say he was last seen alive in the company of a little runaway girl. The same girl you rode off with." "What's that got to do with me?" "Maybe nothing." Pike shrugged. "Maybe everything. Depends on if she's inside that cabin." Elias didn't move. His voice stayed flat. "She's not your concern." Pike's eyes hardened. "She's my brother's murderer." "That's not proven." "I don't need proof," Pike said. "I need her." He nudged his horse forward. Elias raised his rifle without hesitation. Pike stopped. "You're protecting her?" Pike asked. "After what she did?" "I said she's not your concern." Pike's grin was slow and cruel. "You think you can win this?" Quote. Elias didn't answer. His silence was its own warning. Pike leaned back in his saddle. "Fine, I'll give you a choice. Bring her out, or we burn the cabin with both of you in it." Inside, Dileia heard every word. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She pushed herself upright and stumbled to the door, tears burning hot in her eyes. She stepped outside before Elias could stop her. "I'll go," she said. "Please don't hurt him." Elias grabbed her arm. "Get inside." She shook her head. "I'm not worth your life." Pike lit up with triumph. "There she is." "Shut up," Elias growled, but Dileia stepped forward anyway, her bare feet sinking into the snow. "I stabbed Silas," she said. "It was me, not him." "Leave him alone." Pike swung off his horse and grabbed her by the arm. She gasped in pain, and Elias snapped. His rifle clicked as he cocked it. The sound was sharp and absolute. "Let her go," he said. Pike stopped, surprised by the quiet fury in Elias's voice. "Or you'll what? Kill me like she killed Silas?" Elias didn't answer with words. He fired. The bullet hit the snow at Pike's feet, close enough to spray ice across his boots. Pike jumped back, cursing. "You're crazy," Pike yelled. "You'll die for her?" "No," Elias said, "but I'll kill for her." The world went still. Then the other two riders reached for their guns. Elias fired again, hitting one man's arm. He dropped his rifle with a scream. The horses spooked, jerking and kicking up snow. The second man barely got his gun free before Elias's third shot knocked it out of his hand. Pike stared, stunned. Elias dropped to one knee, steadying his rifle again. "Next shot, don't miss," Elias said. "Take your men and leave." Pike hesitated. For a long moment, the wind was the only sound. Then he spat into the snow. "This ain't over, Carr." "It is for today." Pike swung onto his horse and rode off with his wounded men. The sound of hooves faded until the canyon swallowed them. Only then did Elias lower his rifle. Dileia stood shaking, the blanket slipping off her shoulders. Snow clung to her hair. Her lips were blue. She looked at him with something between awe and disbelief. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "Yes, I should. You risked your life. So did you when you walked out that door." She stared at him, breath trembling. "Why? Why would you protect someone like me?" Elias stepped closer. His voice was low and steady. "Because someone should have protected you a long time ago." Quote. Her eyes filled with tears. She looked away, overwhelmed. "People don't protect girls like me." "I'm not people," he said. She didn't know how to answer that. Her breath hitched in her throat. Her hands shook. Elias reached for her, slow enough not to frighten her, and pulled the blanket back around her shoulders. "You're safe," he said, "as long as I breathe." The words shattered something inside her. She leaned into him very slowly, like a wounded animal testing whether a hand was gentle or cruel. Elias didn't move, didn't demand, didn't rush. He just let her choose. And she did. She pressed her forehead to his chest, her tears sinking into his shirt. His arms wrapped around her, careful, protective, solid as the mountains around them. She didn't cry loud. She cried the way she had lived, quietly, painfully, holding everything inside. But Elias held her until the shaking stopped. Later, when they returned to the warm cabin, she sat close to him by the fire. Close enough their shoulders touched. Close enough she could feel the steady rise and fall of his breath. "What happens now?" she asked softly, We survive the winter, he said. Then, whatever comes, we face it together. She nodded, her eyes soft and full of something new. Trust, a beginning, a life she never thought she could have. Elias looked at her with a quiet certainty. He had bought her freedom for $2, but she had given him something worth far more. A reason to live again.